All right, it's 1:02, so let's get started. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. This is the Q1 webinar for the Affordable Solar and Storage Pre-Development and Technical Assistance Solicitation, or Pre-Development Program for short. I'm Dylan Cunningham. I'm an assistant project manager on the New York Sun team here at NY-SRDA, and I'm also joined by Chris Rogers, who is also on the New York Sun team and the lead of the pre-development program. So before we get started and dive into the webinar, just want to get some housekeeping notes out of the way. So all participants will remain muted during today's webinar. If you have a question or comment, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom right-hand side of the WebEx, and we will answer your questions at the end of the webinar. We are also recording today's presentation, and we'll post that as well as these presentation slides to the pre-development program webpage for your reference afterwards. We will also be sending a follow-up email with that information when it is available, and it'll include the links and everything for you to easily reference when we're all set with that, and that typically happens a few days, but no more than a week afterwards. Okay, so lastly, before we get started, I highly encourage everyone to take a look at the presentation slides after they're posted, because there are 8 slides at the end of the presentation that we're not going to really dive into, but that have more information about other NYSERDA programs and resources for multifamily buildings. All right, so I think with that, Chris will take over from here and he will give an overview of the program, jump into some program updates, supported activities, and how to apply. And then, like I mentioned, we will have some time at the end to answer questions and answers. Okay, Chris, take it over.
Thanks, Dylan. And I guess you can advance a few slides. And so the first part that we'll start off with, which I think is always important, is to make sure that folks understand what is the New York Sun program, which the Affordable Solar and Storage Pre-Development and Technical Assistance Program is a key part of. So New York Sun is the overall, it's the name of the solar initiative under NYSERDA, which administers incentives for all new grid-connected solar projects across the state. We have ambitious goals for capacity targets of 10 gigawatts installed by 2030 in the state of New York. And a critical component of that is what is known as the Solar Energy Equity Framework, which encompasses a portfolio of programs that are intended to meet the Climate Act's targets of a minimum of 35 and a goal of 40% of benefits from all NYSERDA projects or all NYSERDA programs and funding going to disadvantaged communities. And so this includes specific incentives for single family housing, multifamily housing, incentives that encourage community solar projects to target disadvantaged communities, and significantly, the Affordable Solar and Storage Pre-Development Technical Assistance Program, or PON 3414, which is intended to encourage the development of more community-based projects that are targeting disadvantaged communities. Next slide. And so the pre-development program, it's intended to, the end date of the program is essentially the end date of, or the current end date of our 2030 target of 10 gigawatts of installed capacity in New York by 2030. And the grants themselves, as I mentioned, they're intended to target affordable housing, disadvantaged communities, and they're intended to be community-led installations that will offer benefits to low to moderate income households. When speaking of PON 3414, the best way to think about it in terms of what sort of projects are eligible and what are intended to be supported there, it's intended to target projects that otherwise would not be the first target of perhaps a solar developer or installer, but which different groups that have constituencies of low to moderate income households are very much interested in. They're interested in engaging in the clean energy economy, but they're looking for support and they're looking to fund the technical expertise that would allow them to determine if either a solar or a storage project will be viable within their communities, and what are the different, I guess, ownership or financing models that will get them to that stage. Next slide. While the overall, I guess it's important to emphasize the overall end date of the program is not until, basically it's 2029 currently, but we encourage folks, and we have a quarterly submission deadline. And so these webinars are intended to remind folks that there's an upcoming deadline where new applications should be submitted and new applications will be reviewed. That although there is a quarterly or calendar quarterly submission deadline, that does not prevent NYSERDA in certain instances and circumstances from reviewing applications outside of that calendar quarterly schedule. But that's typically the I guess the organization schedule that folks are prepared to review, and when you should expect to hear the results back or the approval or any request for additional information within that calendar quarterly structure. Next slide. This next slide is just illustrating what those next deadlines will be. The current one will be at the end of March. But if you're still speaking with if you're considering submitting an application, and if you're speaking with different groups and you don't think you'll be ready in the next couple of months, apart from reaching out to either myself or someone else on the NY-Sun team with any questions that you might have, I would encourage you to perhaps target one of the later submission deadlines in the year. I think the other part to mention this is rejection, or I guess if an application is not accepted or approved within this calendar quarterly structure, that does not prohibit you from resubmitting a revised application that perhaps addresses the concerns that the reviewers had. And so if you submit at the end of before the end of March and that application does not get approved, you can submit again for the June or the September deadline. Again, the program is intended to be structured in a way that is flexible enough, that is responsive to the type of community-led projects and the unique challenges that folks that are attempting to develop community-led solar and storage projects will be developing. Next slide. The real key part, I guess there's several key parts in terms of eligibility, but in terms of the projects that are the primary targets of this, there's solar and storage installations that are targeting regulated affordable housing, and regulated affordable housing has a very specific meaning. It's typically defined by multifamily housing properties, although they can be portfolios of single family housing that are operating under some form of regulatory agreement from an oversight authority, either a state or a different municipal entity, but typically a state or federal entity such as HUD. This slide shows a list of the type of programs for regulated multifamily affordable housing. And if you are talking with the team and you're considering developing a project and you're wondering, will this project be eligible? I think one of the first questions that you can ask is, well, is the project intended to be serving a property that is under, or that is being supported by one of these programs? Is it on those buildings directly that is being supported by this program? Is it a community solar or a remote crediting project that is indirectly servicing one of these projects? Because if the answer to those questions are no, then typically this is not the type of project that would be supported under a PON 3414 grant. Next slide. The other two terms that I think are very important for this because of the unique type of applicants and groups that get involved, while perhaps the quintessential recipient of grants under this program are housing authorities or nonprofit affordable housing managers, that is not the exclusive limit of the recipients of these grants. In addition to for-profit affordable housing that are managing these different portfolios, the technical service providers are also eligible to be part of grant applications, provided that they are working in partnership with either an owner or manager of affordable housing, a different group or organization, and community-led organization that has a large constituency of low to moderate income households. And so if you are right now, if you're listening to this webinar, if you are part of perhaps an engineering firm or a firm that would be more accurately described as a technical service provider then it will be incumbent upon you, if you're considering submitting an application, to show that you are operating in partnership with an affordable housing manager or community-led group that has a strong low to moderate income constituency, so that you can demonstrate that this is indeed a community-led project and not a project that is more coming from the outside of perhaps a solar developer or installer that is sort of dictating the terms to the community where this project will be sited. It's intended to be led from that community side that is working with different types of technical service providers. Now moving on to a few program updates. Next slide. So there's just a few updates that I want to walk through. One related to I guess they're more reminders of the current status of a few relevant initiatives and programs for folks that are developing distributed energy projects that are targeting affordable housing. Next slide. The first one, and we'll likely be talking about this more in the future, but is Con Edison's Make Ready program, a program that is intended to provide support to, or interconnection support to, projects within the Con Edison region. And so while the pre-development program does fund and support projects across the state of New York, in all counties and regions, including Long Island, that also includes projects that are located within municipal electricity service territories, as well as projects that are within the utility service territories, but are not system benefits charge or SBC paying customers. The example there are typically NYPA customers served for housing authorities. All projects are supported within the state of New York. They're supported for this program. And so this Con Edison, this is just a subset of that, but it is potentially a very, very useful tool for on-site net meter projects that are targeting affordable housing within Con Edison. You can get support for interconnection. The pre-development program is not, you're not eligible to use those funds to subsidize interconnection costs, but the Con Edison Make Ready program is, for more details on this program, I'm happy to connect any interested parties to the relevant folks at Con Edison. And again, we're intending to have some folks on talk about it and perhaps answer more questions in detail. Next slide. Just to provide a brief update on the current status of the non-residential incentives, which are typically the incentives that are going to apply to, paradoxically, to regulated multifamily affordable housing within the upstate and the Con Edison regions. And currently, the block we're in the second block for projects that are under 200 kilowatts in size in the Con Edison region. So now that baseline incentive has gone down to $1, and the 200 kilowatts to 1 megawatt has also dropped down to 80 cents. Again, if this project is in Con Edison is located on regulated affordable housing, there are additional incentives that are available for that. But if you're targeting an installation that maybe will be built in a parking lot and isn't going to be on housing somewhere, we'd like to remind folks that, the incentives are, well, I guess these blocks are continuing to get filled up, and the incentives are declining. Next slide. To mitigate against that, and this will be relevant for any installation that is built directly upon regulated affordable housing, there is the multifamily affordable housing incentive that will increase the NY-SERDA incentive, and this will be for the lifetime of the NY-Sun program. A project on Long Island was eligible for $1 per watt incentive. In Con Edison, a project will either receive $1.60 a watt if it is either remote credit or net metered, or $2 per watt if it is community solar. The upstate region also receives a $1 per watt incentive. This is just focused on the installation costs of a solar installation. This is not including the inclusive community solar adder, which you are not able to stack the multifamily affordable housing incentive with that. But depending on where you are installing your project, this may be something that you want to consider, figuring out what the best New York Sun incentives will apply to your project. If the location is best on the affordable housing, then you're looking at the multifamily affordable housing incentive. If it's somewhere more generally within the community, potentially the inclusive community solar adder would be very relevant to your particular project. And next slide, the next reminder that I just want to give to folks is just a reminder of the Inflation Reduction Act and how this may benefit your projects. A guidance has come out, or a significant amount of guidance has come out over the last year, but in general, projects that are eligible for this grant ought to be or should be eligible for increased federal tax credits for their particular projects, because there is an increased adder for low-income community projects as well as low-income residential building projects that essentially overlaps one-to-one with the type of projects that are intended to be supported under the pre-development program. There's also the ability, again, if part of your community-led groups include a nonprofit, there is the ability to take that tax credit in a upfront as a separate payment instead of using it as a traditional tax credit, and so that opens the door for potentially more creative uses or abilities to fund and to finance a larger range of projects. And with that, that's a good segue to talk through supported activities. And so next slide. So yeah, I touched on this briefly in terms of how the Inflation Reduction Act expands the different availabilities of potentially for tax credits for these projects. I would encourage you to speak to a tax professional about how your organization might be able to take advantage of these particular changes. But in lieu of that, or not necessarily in lieu of that, but alongside that, the pre-development program is intended to help organizations work through that type of planning. That is, figuring out how you're going to finance the project. That's one of the most common uses of the grants themselves. Different managers of affordable housing, while they may have the space, they often have to get creative for large capital intensive projects, and that would include a solar installation. And so you can use the grant activities to find the appropriate partners, perhaps to run a competitive solicitation to find the best installer to partner with for you, as well as to do the analysis to figure out what the best organizational ownership and funding models will be for your particular project. Next slide. And I would say that based off of the experience of past grant recipients, the ability to run a competitive solicitation to get maybe more bids and to pool together perhaps what might be individually less attractive smaller solar installations, but getting them together, that dramatically helps to reduce the overall cost of those installations. And so pre-development grants, you could use them to essentially put together the solicitation that would help you reduce the overall cost of any amount of, or I guess the solar projects that the different installers are bidding, as well as to help you gain the expertise to adequately assess those bids that are coming in. Next slide. So the way that the application process works is that it's entirely conducted online. There is as Dylan mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, we will make these slides available. The recording will be available, and these links will be available in that slide. I'm happy to provide those to anyone who has not found or needs help locating the pre-development program webpage. But the entire process it occurs online. There's on the funding opportunity page, there's a link to all of the relevant attachments. If you run into any issues with submitting an application, I would encourage you to reach out to myself or someone at NYSERDA to make sure that you're able to get the help that you need. But also, as I mentioned, there is no penalty for resubmission. And so if in submitting you discover that you've made significant errors or a critical error somewhere, you can, if you reach out to NYSERDA, you can resubmit the application, and there's no penalty for doing that. And so with that, that takes us to the Q&A portion of this. And so I'll pause and we'll see if any questions have come in while I've been speaking. And I'll add, please add any questions that you have about the presentation to the chat, and we'll go through those in order. All right, so we have a few questions that have come in. And so the question is, do non-affordable housing multifamily projects qualify for commercial incentives? And just to make sure that I understand the question, sometimes the New York Sun terminologies may be confusing on this, because we do have, for New York Sun, there's different levels of incentives. There's the residential, there's non-residential, and then there are commercial incentives in the upstate region. And so but sometimes if you meant by commercial incentives just the baseline NYSERDA incentive overall, the answer is yes, you are eligible for baseline incentives. Also in the upstate region, I think all projects above 750 kilowatts would receive the New York Sun commercial incentive. If that did not answer your question, please respond. I think it's just, yes, there are currently incentives, although those blocks are closing. So I'm not sure what the future blocks will be for non-affordable housing projects. Next question, could a technical review and draft RFP prepared by an outside engineering firm qualify? The question would, the critical component would be the overall project team of what was involved. If there was an engineering firm and they were applying for essentially funding to subsidize a technical review, that likely would not be eligible. There's, I think within the overall program rules, you are not intended to use the grant activities to fund basically regular operations of their business. I think that where that may qualify is if you're an affordable housing organization and you're seeking to put together an RFP and you need to hire an engineering firm to work with you on that, then I think that's the critical part, is that there would need to be that close partnership with an affordable housing entity for that type of grant, and just if it's just the engineering firm applying to subsidize a technical review, then probably not. But if it's an affordable housing agency that is leading, or excuse me, ownership group that is leading that, then probably yes. Can grant funds be used to hire new staff and outreach and grant management? And the grants are not intended to cover salary and hiring, and so yeah, likely no. I what I can say as a practical matter, that different community-based organizations have used the grants to sort of subsidize um, solar. I guess them going into different solar activities and doing that, but it's not really intended to be sort of something that maybe would be more covered by NYSERDA's workforce development team, for which there are I'm trying to remember what the names of it. They have a few different programs. They have the internship program. They also have the subsidy program, and I think they have an environmental justice fellow program that actually that might cover that. And so there may be other NYSERDA programs that I think that would cover that the pre-development program would likely not. Can you explain how the grants can be used to support single-family homeowners? Um, so in general, I think where the one exception for where single-family homeowners can be supported under these grants are in the upstate region. There are different structures for affordable housing, where instead of singular multifamily units, there will be an entity or a housing authority will own a portfolio of single family homes. And so essentially, instead of having, bunching together 100 units in one building, there will be 100 units spread across perhaps 20 buildings within across a couple of neighborhoods. And those single family buildings are still operating under different regulatory agreement structures, perhaps under HCR, and those type of portfolios of single family housing that are operating under a manager of affordable housing, those are eligible for the same sorts of technical assistance. But if you're talking about funding, single family homes and developments and sort of one-off projects, the pre-development program is not intended to support that directly. And then there's another question: if the Public Service Commission approves an opt-out CDG program statewide, how would it impact this program potentially? I would hope that they would be additive to each other. I think an opt-out CDG program potentially it'd dramatically reduce costs and outreach and access to a range of disadvantaged communities and low to moderate income households. And so if you have an opt-out, if opt-out CDG gets approved, I guess it's, perhaps there would be a different type of projects that might apply to the program from different municipalities or entities around the state that are perhaps intending to develop community solar projects that they want to then put into their opt-out program. I guess I don't have a firm answer on that, but there's certainly a world of possibilities where if opt-out CEG is approved, that it wouldn't remove the need for this sort of grant support, and the two can work together. And with that out of the way, Dylan, I think you were maybe gonna unmute someone. Someone had a question that they wanted to ask verbally.
Yes, Carolyn, you should be able to unmute if you would like to ask your question. It's also possible, Chris, that you answered the question already.
Yeah, Carolyn, if I answered that was about the single family ones, then, but otherwise we could also touch base on that. what the existing single family solar homeowner support. There is a low to moderate income incentive for single family homeowners that I guess it's a separate incentive from the pre-development program. Although it does not cover, it would just cover the solar component. Oh, no worries, Carolyn. And thank you all for your questions. And I'll just pause to see if other questions are added to the chat. So the question was, does NYSERDA provide technical support for how to apply to the federal low income tax credit adder? No, in general, and I tried to be clear on that, and that we do not provide tax advice. And so my recommendation is that you should look into that, but NYSERDA does not provide direct recommendations on how to obtain and sort of avoids getting into direct tax advice recommendations. And the link to the presentation will be sent out for everyone, all attendees. There will be a link that will go out that will have both the link to the slides and to the recording of the presentation. So it looks like questions are slowing down. So we'll give it a few more minutes. But in the meantime, I just want a reminder, my contact information is on the screen now. And so if you have other questions that you'd like to ask directly, please send those to me via email, or please give me a call, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. But otherwise, we'll give it a few more minutes to see if if some questions come in. And Dylan has unsubtly reminded me that future webinars will be held again on a calendar quarterly basis. Next slide. If this is the first time you've attended a webinar, you can sign up to receive emails from New York Sun, as well as notifications of upcoming webinars by visiting our website, going to the Contact Us, and then signing up for the affordable solar and the low to moderate income email list. Next slide. Just a quick reminder to make sure that solar announcements is one of your contacts, and it's basically not going to your junk inbox. I would say the New York Sun team we try to limit the communications that we have to go out to critical information, but the solar announcements email is where you will get updates on the potential new megawatt block sizes, as well as the closing or the, I guess, the expiry of any funds. That's where you will get announcements about this webinar or new programs and incentives that the New York Sun team has or has designed. And it is the solar announcement is essentially the official communication channel where all that information will go out first, as well as any upcoming webinars on programs that we may have. And so with that, I think so I guess one last thing is that there was a question about whether the non-affordable housing projects qualify for commercial incentives. And I think the answer to that question is that for as long as the megawatt blocks remain open, there will still be incentives that are available for non-affordable housing projects. Meaning that, I think we're in the last blocks in the upstate region now, and so if you're still eligible for a 25 cents per watt incentive for a non-residential project, that's 25 kilowatts to 750 kilowatts, and it's a 5 cents a watt incentive for projects that are over 750 kilowatts. So that will apply whether or not the project is multifamily affordable housing. But again, there currently are no announced blocks after those. And so once those funds expire, the only incentives that will be available will be those for single family, multifamily, affordable housing. I hope that answers it. If that doesn't answer, please feel free to reach out, christopher.rogers@nicerta.ny.gov, and I can maybe provide additional insight. But with that, I guess we'll give folks back the remaining 20 minutes, and please enjoy your afternoon.
Thanks all. Thanks, Chris.